Next speaker, Matthias Stahl, is going to give us a talk entitled Why We Need More Data Art. Now, Matthias is now Deputy Head of Graphics and Interactive Department at the German news magazine Der Spiegel in Hamburg. His company is called Higg in Germany. I'm sure you can correct my mispronunciation if there is mispronunciation. But before data visualization, Matthias studied biochemistry and performed deep bioinformatic analysis on leukemia datasets. And it was through this work that he first discovered the worth of data viz. It is quite a transition, and some might question if it's a worthy transition, but you can read all about it on his website. So, to your talk, Matthias, why we need more data art. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, Higg is perfectly fine. That's how it is pronounced. So,
Good,
yeah, I'm working at Der Spiegel and doing data visualizations there. And usually data visualization for me is like a good radio show. Next slide, please. Because in a radio show, you as the one doing the data visualization, you are the show master. And you also have an audience that you want to inform. And that's completely the same with a radio show. Next slide, please. But you do not have this old radio device for your radio show. You have a paper, maybe, if you're doing static visualizations. You maybe have a browser as a radio device when you do interactive data visualizations. And maybe you have something completely different, like an audio device when we think of data sonification, maybe. But you have to keep in mind, as the show master of your data visualization show, that you are not in control of the channel selector. So you are not in control of your audience. You cannot decide if they are looking at your data visualization, if they really care about it. And also, you are not in control of the volume button, so you have no idea how impactful the data visualization reaches your audience. Next slide. But there's maybe a way how to be in indirect control of these two buttons. And it burns down to the question, how can we be effective in data visualizations, in creating data visualizations? Next slide. It all starts with the data, of course. That's already in the name because we want to visualize the data. But the data alone is not sufficient. Next slide. We need a story to build around it. And this is, I think, what we heard a couple of times today already. If we do not tell the story about the data, we won't reach our audience. They do not care then, and they are not interested in the data set, in the information that we want to show. Next. And I show you just an example how such a data visualization with story could look like. And this is work that I did when I previously worked for my own company, Higg, where I visualized the child mortality rates of all the countries of the United Nations. And here you can see in different angles the different countries, and you can see like how the child mortality rate was today. That's the outer circle, or 10 or 20 years earlier. And you can, of course, see that child mortality rates are going down. And you see a lot of numbers also in the middle, like here in the center, you can see how child mortality rate in one country, this example, Sierra Leone, is going down. But it's really hard to relate to these numbers. So here it says, for example, that 105 children are dying before they are 5 years old, based on 1,000 births. And it's, yeah, we cannot really relate to this data because we do not know the individual stories behind. We do not know these children. And it's a completely different story when, for example, a child in your neighborhood is dying and you know the family, you know maybe the kid, and then it really affects you. It's, yeah, there's like a fireworks of emotions in you because you relate to the story. And that's something which this data visualization cannot do. It cannot tell the story of all these thousands of children behind. Next slide. And so we need to add something. Next. We need to add emotions to our data visualization. So we need to add the emotions that we can relate to these individual stories that are behind the data. Next. And there's one psychology researcher whose name is Paul Slovich, and he's researching psychic numbing, and he's saying the more who die, the less we care. And this is an effect that we, I think, all know. We cannot really relate to death numbers that are in the thousands or hundreds of thousands in crises like the Syrian war or something similar. We do not really care about the individual stories behind. But when we see one singular story of someone who's dying, we can relate to it. Next. And this is, I think, a phenomenon that every one of you knows. We just need to look at a random newspaper. I selected the New York Times now, and they are daily showing the new reported deaths by day of the coronavirus. And this is a quite current chart, and it's a perfectly fine visualization. Everything is good here, nothing to criticize. And you can see that up until now, every day, there are more than 1,000 people dying from coronavirus. And this is something people have really adapted to. It's not news anymore, and people cannot, again, really relate to these 1,000 people. Next. But when we also look at the New York Times at a different section, we can see images as well. And images are really good in transmitting and transferring emotion. The radio show Matthias. So here is a scene on a cemetery in Bergamo, for example, at the beginning of the corona crisis, and everyone can really relate to the situation, and you can feel emotions because you all know how it is to be on a cemetery. And here with the combination of this maybe sick person in the front, yeah, you really ask questions. Yeah, what is going on there? It's a sad atmosphere and all that. And I always thought it might be cool to take these emotions that images can convey and to build them into data visualizations as well. The question is, how can you do that? Next. And I think emotions can be the key here. So we could use emotions within the data visualizations to make them more effective, to make them being closer to the audience so that the audience can really relate to the individual stories behind the statistics. Next. And there's a tool that we can use which facilitates a little bit to bring in the emotions into our data visualizations, and that's data art. And data art is just the artistic work based on data. So it's not generative art where you use randomness to create nice pictures by some programming language. No. Data art is really based on data, and you try to be as creative as possible, as inspired as possible, to build data visualizations with built-in emotions. Next. And now this is really abstract, I know. I just want to show you an example of how that could look like. And this is a project I worked on earlier this year before I joined Der Spiegel, where I was in contact with an organization which is called Journalism is Not a Crime. And this is an organization made up of Iranian journalists that really care of their country, and they have a list of people that are pursued by the government of Iran because of the words they've said or they've written. So there are, for example, journalists and social media activists, and it is known that some of them are in prison, some of them are living in exile, some of them have even been killed in custody. And this list comprises almost 900 persons. And they had like these numbers on the website, but again, it's quite hard to relate to it. Maybe you can estimate how many 900 people is by comparing it to your village close by or something like that, but you don't know the story behind. And so I was asked to build a data visualization that combines the statistics on the one hand with the individual stories on the other hand. Next. And one of the first things I do when I build data visualizations, I look for inspiration. And I thought all of these people in the data set, they must be really proud of their country because they want to make their country a better place. And I know for myself, because I like architecture, that Iranian people are very proud of the Persian architecture in their area. So they use these colorful tiles arranged into really lovely shapes. And I thought it would be cool to take this idea using data art and merge it with the data to build a data visualization like the one on the next slide. So this is visualizing censorship in Iran, and I built these rosettes where each of these tiles is a real person. So you can see that by hovering over it. Links will be shared afterwards. So you can see, okay, every tile is one person. I can see that because there is a name and an image. And then we have this navigation bar here on top where the audience can arrange their own statistics, so they can now see, well, what people are those? Are those journalists, social media activists, artists? And they can even add color to it so that you can see, okay, how many female journalists are in the data set. Of course, you can mix and match how you like. So you can add like the investigating institution as the color, for example. And so you can a little bit explore the statistics on your own. But at the same time, you can hover over these tiles. And if you are interested in the story of this person, you can click on it, go to the biography of that person and really see, okay, now this is a real person behind this simple tile. And you can really immerse with the biography and see who that is and what story he or she shares. So this is visualizing censorship in Iran, which is an attempt to merge the statistics on the one hand with the individual stories on the other hand, and really to make this whole world of censorship making explorable. Next slide. There's just one problem with visualizations like that, and that is because we have this navigation bar. You need an audience which is happy to play with statistics around. So you need an audience that has the time to click on these buttons, to explore the tiles, to read the biographies and all that. And maybe sometimes you do not have this audience. And this is exactly the situation that we have at Der Spiegel, at our news magazine. So we also have like a website, we are a news website, and usually our audience is just scrolling very quickly the articles, just clicking on the one article that catches the reader's interest. And then also within the article, usually our audience, they only scroll. They are looking for images, looking for graphics. They really do not want to play around. They don't want to click on buttons and add color to a visualization. So we can use data art as well here, but we need other tools to implement it. Next. And for that, I want to show you an example which is not that sad as the ones before. So this is an article that we did about the Nobel Prize winners this year. And we just introduced the Nobel Prize winners here by these little circles with the color of the prize category around. We highlight some of them. And then we showed them in the context of all Nobel Prize winners that we had since 1901. And for the reader, it's clear, okay, every circle is now a person because we introduced it. And you just need to scroll, and then you get different people highlighted, different statistics explained, like how many female versus male awardees were there. And then you can also use these circles for standard chart types, like histograms, like here where we show the age of the Nobel Prize winners. And you have now a better relationship to these data points because we just showed in the beginning everyone is a person. And in between, we share these individual stories about some of them. And so this is also a way with storytelling plus data art, how you can combine the statistics, which is really hard to understand, which is free of emotions, with the individual stories of these Nobel laureates behind. Next. And I hope with this information that you have the data, you build the story around, and then you also build the emotions around. Then you are able to be in indirect control, at least, of the channel selector button and also of the volume button. Because with these little tips and tools that I showed you, you can tweak your data visualization that it has a better impact, that it is more effective for your audience. Next. But yeah, try it out yourself. I'm also happy to share the links in the chat afterwards. the child mortality rates and the visualizing censorship. They are just free. The Nobel laureates, unfortunately, are behind our paywall. But anyway, you can go to my Twitter profile as well, where I usually share all the visualizations free for you. And I'm also happy to hear your feedback if these data visualizations really evoke emotions with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthias. That was a really interesting talk, and so lovely that you use Iranian architecture when you're thinking about creating your own data visualizations as well. As always, we've got questions coming in, and I'm personally very interested in your own journalism stroke science world. We had a talk earlier from 16 Boog, who said that the attention span now is only about 2 to 8 seconds long. So in the world of Der Spiegel, you'll be hot on this, and you've probably got some data points on this. How long do people spend reading your articles versus looking at the data viz versus looking at the images or videos?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do not have really reliable data on that, I have to say. But from my experience, usually people spend 1 to 3 minutes within an article, if we talk about online articles. And a good part of that is looking at graphics and images. Yeah, and usually people use graphics or also images to get into the article. And that's why we at Der Spiegel very often now start our articles with the data visualization so that we can capture the reader's attention and then add also some text to it to go deeper, because usually Der Spiegel readers, they want to have a little bit more background, so data viz is not enough usually. And yeah, that's how we do that.
I think 1 to 3 minutes is very generous. I hope that they do. We've got a lovely question here from Ralitza Sultanova, I hope I've pronounced the name correctly, who says, what tools did you use for the Iranian data? Great visualization and stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a interactive data visualization which runs in the browser, and usually when you build things for the browser, it all boils down to using JavaScript as a tool, and that's what I did here as well. And I used to implement that one as well. Front-end framework, which is now quite popular in the database world. Also used the New York Times, for example, and I also used JavaScript. And the code, by the way, for this visualization is open source. So if you go to my GitHub profile, which I think you can also find under my name, you can find the code for that visualization as well.
We didn't quite catch all of that, but I'm so glad that you're back with us, Matthias, and you left us with the most important comment at the end. We can get in touch with you. Another question here from Wolfgang Egner, again, very common questioner today. Very nice talk, great examples. Isn't being objective a major aspect of data visualization? How does that go along with stories of individuals or emotions? Couldn't that undermine the facts and lead to perceived biases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. But I think it's really two different things. You have the objectivity, so you try to show the data as they are, and you try to show or to tell the story that the data also tells. So you do not want to bias the reader and point them to something else which is not important. And I think the best advice that you do not get unobjective, so subjective, is that you really data telling what do I want to tell to my audience and which are the important questions. So if you start with that and if you have that in mind always, I think there's there's no danger that the emotions or the creativity that you build in will bias your readership.
We lost you again partly there, but I'm going to try one more question because we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to read you two questions actually, and perhaps you can combine the answers. Simon Steuer writes, how do you create and maintain data visualizations in the fast newspaper world. And I've also got a question here from Inma, who says, wonderful presentation. According to what you mention, sometimes to create the story, you need to personalize the data to create an emotion, which is not possible according to data protection regulation. So how do you make data visualization emotional? So data viz, how do you make it emotional? And the second question, how do you maintain or create data viz in the fast newspaper world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I also lost you partially now, but I understood how we create maintainable database in the fast-paced news world. Yeah, usually we try to do long-term projects in parallel to short-term projects. So of course we have these projects where some news is arising, and then you quickly need to do something. Then you just need the standards and also the power of your personnel that we have in our team to build good database very quickly. But we also work a lot of the time for long-term projects where we really have a long creative process, where we sketch a lot and talk a lot. So yeah, I think it's this combination in the short-term and the long-term projects that you need to do at the news journal.
Thank you so much, Matthias. We'll leave the other part, the emotional side, to a follow-up through Swapcard. And also, we're losing the connection with you a little bit, but I hope that you can hear me when I say thank you so much for that